And welcome to Journey of Enlightenment. I am your host, Dr. Roger Gopal, and it is always a pleasure being here with you to discuss aspects of the Ramayana and its application to our everyday life. An old sage once told me, he said that peace, mental contentment, is really a state of the mind more than a state of the situation. I remember asking him, what exactly does that mean? He said, it is possible that we can be in heaven and yet our mind is in turmoil, so we are still in a state of hell. It is also possible that we can be in hell, but our mind is so peaceful and blissful that we are in heaven. It all depends on our perspective in life, regardless of the situation that is around us. Today's topic would be contentment. The way we look at things, the way we see things, the way we interpret and respond to life. I remember a friend of mine was telling me that winter was so bitterly cold that she could not wait for winter to come to an end. It is so harassing, it is so uncomfortable, layers and layers of clothing. Now that winter has ended, she's complaining it is so hot. She cannot stand the heat that she wishes that winter is here again. We all know people like this. We know people who are perpetually looking for the negative aspects of life, and we know people who are perpetually seeing the positives in life. Which is the reality? The reality is all based upon what we see through our mind and not necessarily through our eyes. When we look at a rose, who sees the rose? The rose is red. Is it the eyes? Is it the mind that sees the rose? Is it the intellect interpreting what the mind has consumed in order to see the rose? Who sees the rose? And we may look at the rose and say, what a beautiful rose. It's so glorious in its nature. It brings such a beauty to earth. Someone else might look at the rose. Who sees the rose? Is it her eyes? Is it her mind? Is it her intellect? And would the interpretation of the rose be the same as my interpretation of the rose? That other person might look at the same rose and say, oh, I remember when my first boyfriend brought me a rose just like this. Whereas I might look at the rose and say, this would look beautiful in my rose garden. It all depends on our perspective. In the Ramayana, we know that Sri Ram had to leave Ayodhya. He was about to journey into exile for 14 years in the forest. Everyone encouraged Sita to remain back in Ayodhya, in the safety of the palace. But she would have none of it. Sita Mata was committed to going with Sri Ram and accompanying him on his journey. In fact, when she was reminded that the forest was filled with beasts, no huts, no clothing, no food. For a princess, this was very strange. But her response in Ayodhya Khan was one that taught us a lesson for thousands of years later on. She said to those who were encouraging her to remain back, quote, "Birds and beasts will be my kindred, my city and the bark of trees my spotless robes, and a hut of leaves in the company of my husband will be as comfortable as the abode of gods." The immortal words of Sita Mata. Perspective. What Sita Mata did, let's take a deeper look at it. The first thing that she addressed was the beast of the fields. These ferocious animals that roam the forest. One could argue that it is a perspective of fear if they look at it from that particular angle. Sita could have selected fear in the way that she interpreted her situation, but rather she converted fear into friendship. The beasts of the field would now be her kindred, her friends, her company. She would enjoy being around them. She would gaze upon their beauty as they roamed the forest. She would find solace in the birds that whistle or in the deer that prance. What perspective would you have taken? Secondly, Sita Mata was a princess that wore most likely a beautiful crown. The most expensive robes and cloth would be given to her, adorned with the most exquisite jewelry. She was leaving all this behind. She was willing to convert the concept of lack into the concept of contentment. She said that the bark of the trees would be her spotless robes. How many times do we go about life looking at what we have and what we don't have? And many a times we tend to focus heavily on what we don't have. Why don't I have a better job? Why don't I have these new opportunities in my life? Why don't I have more money? Why can't I not buy a better car? Why can't I not buy a better home? And we complain about what we don't have versus being happy, thankful with what we do have. It doesn't mean that we should not pursue or we should not aspire for greater things in life, but it definitely means that we should appreciate what we have, cherish it. Another interesting aspect of the immortal words of Sita Mata is that she was willing to live in a hut of leaves in the company of her husband and considered it as comfortable as the abode of the gods. Can we convert sorrow into joy? And the answer is yes, we can. How? It is simply choosing what our emotions are. One might say, is it even possible for us to choose an emotion? And the answer is yes. We choose our emotions by the thought processes that flow through our minds every single second of every single day. Sita Mata chose the emotion of joy, the emotion of peace, the emotion of contentment. rather than complain about leaving a palace with servants, nevertheless, with all the comforts of the best bed that would be offered to a princess. She was willing to happily live in a hut of leaves once it was in the company of Sri Ram. There are three important lessons that we learned from Sita Mata here. One is that we can, based upon the perspective that we choose, we can convert lack into contentment, fear into courage and friendship, and sorrow into joy. It all depends on what we choose to see. In life, no one promises that everything will be easy. In fact, many of us may face very difficult challenges. Sometimes those challenges can be in the form of health issues, maybe the loss of a loved one, perhaps it might be finances. Nevertheless, whatever those challenges are, it is not for any one of us to judge who is going through more problems than the next. Or, yes, things are bad with me, but it is worse for somebody else, so I should feel good. That is not a perspective that we wish to take. How then should we face this? We face this by simply looking at the truth of our situation and what is the best we can make of that situation. In Sita Mata's case, there's one common golden thread between the perspective of fear and friendship, lack and contentment, sorrow and joy. This common thread, this commonality that exists, was her willingness to remove a negative point of view and replace it with a positive point of view. I know many of us talk about positive thinking and the value of positive thinking and how positive thinking works. What I'm speaking about today, that conversion from negative to positive, from fear to friendship, from lack to contentment, from sorrow to joy, it's not just about positive thinking. Many a times we may address positive thinking from a superficial level, from a surface level, meaning that yes, today will be a good day. But internally, we are still suffering from discouragement, from loneliness, from depression. So we are saying these nice words just with our lip, but it is not penetrating the deeper subconscious levels of the mind. In Sita Mata's case, it was not just simply at a surface level or superficial level, but her words were penetrating deeper into her thought system that created a new thought structure, a new knowledge construct, which means that she was actually processing in her mind, in her psyche, what her new life would be and her acceptance of that new life. It is not an easy process, but it is not a hopeless process. The beauty with going through any difficulty in life is that although it might be difficult, there is hope once we're able to think through this process properly. A friend of mine, about 72 years old, we'll call him Jim, visited last few months back. And as we sat down to have a conversation, I can see from the look on his face that he felt as though the sky had fallen. I could not help but ask Jim what was the matter. And his response to me, what is not the matter? So, due to curiosity, I pressed Jim further. What is bothering you today? He looked at me, he said, what is bothering me today has been bothering me for the past few years. What is the point of my life now? What is the purpose of my life at this stage? I have lost everything. So I said, Jim, what did you lose? He said, I am now retired. I have no daily goals anymore. I have no purpose for getting out of bed. What do I do with my life at this stage? I said, is that all that is bothering you, Jim? He looked at me again, and I can see the pain in his eyes. And Jim answered, I am lonely. My wife passed away so many years ago. My children are all grown up. They live their own lives, and rightly so. But now, I am lonely. I asked Jim, I said, tell me, is there something in your life that you wanted to do that you never did before, or that you did not fulfill? And he said, well, actually, yes. I've always wanted to write a book. So I said, and Jim, what is keeping you back now? He said, actually, nothing. I said, what else, Jim? What else would you like to do in life? He said, I wanted to travel to certain places, just to see it. I said, and you have the finances, so why don't you? He paused. He said, yes, why don't I? Why don't I do it? I said, Jim, are you restricted from seeing your children, grandchildren? He said, no, I go anytime that I wish. They love to have me there. So I said, okay, Jim, let's look at the truth of your situation. You are alone, but you are not lonely. You have friends. You have your children who loves you dearly. You have your grandchildren who adore you. So you might be alone, but are you really lonely? And he looked at me and he said, no, I'm not lonely, despite the fact that I'm alone. I then asked him, I said, do you really think that life is over after retirement? He said, Roger, I thought it was, but truly there is so much for me to do in life if I just make up my mind to get it done. From what I understand, he is preparing to take his nice long trip with his family, and he started his book. It is all about what perspective we take in life. We can either choose to find all the negativities that exist, all that is going wrong, why things will not work out, expect the worst in our lives, or we can choose to see things differently. That yes, life is difficult, but life is not hopeless. that yes, things may not go our way today or as we want it to be right now, but it doesn't mean that life will not be better for us tomorrow. We may lack certain things in our lives at this stage, but why not be happy with what we have while we also embrace the joy in working for what we want? We need to change this mindset from negativity to positivity, not based only on a superficial level, not based simply on the surface level, but sink it deep into our subconscious state, where we now build a mental construct of positive living, and not just simply positive thinking. Thank you once again for joining me on Journey of Enlightenment, and I look forward to seeing you in our next episode. Thank you.